I saved the seat beside me for the person I believed would always be there. But as the lights came on and the ceremony began, that chair remained empty. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and for 68 years, I believed I understood the meaning of family. I believed that the people we raise, the people we love, and the people we sacrifice for would always remember the moments that mattered most. That belief was tested on the day I had waited for my entire life. It was supposed to be one of my proudest days, not because of an award or recognition, but because I thought I would finally share a special moment with my son, Daniel. I thought he would look at me the way he did when he was a little boy. I thought he would smile and say, "Mom, I am proud of you." For years, Daniel had been the center of my world. I still remembered the small moments that shaped our lives together. I remembered packing his lunches before school, waiting outside during his soccer games, and staying awake late at night when he needed someone to talk to. After his father passed away, I worked hard to make sure Daniel never felt alone. I wanted him to have opportunities one never had. I wanted him to chase his dreams without worrying about the struggles I had faced. And when he grew into a successful adult, I believed every sacrifice had been worth it. I was never looking for repayment. A mother does not love her child because she expects something in return. Love is simply what a parent gives. But as the years passed, I noticed the distance between us growing. Daniel became busy with his career, his responsibilities, and his own life. I understood that. I knew adulthood came with challenges. I never wanted to be the mother who demanded too much of her son. So I told myself that fewer phone calls did not mean less love. Shorter visits did not mean I mattered less. I kept making excuses because that is what mothers often do. We protect the people we love, even when we quietly miss them. The event that day was held at a beautiful community center in our town. For more than 20 years, I had volunteered with local programs that helped families, seniors, and children. I never did it for attention. I did it because I believed every person deserved kindness. When the organization decided to honor my years of service, I was surprised. I almost refused because I did not think I had done anything extraordinary. I was simply helping where I could. But everyone around me insisted that I attend. They told me this day was about celebrating the difference one person could make. The morning of the ceremony, I carefully chose my outfit. I looked in the mirror and smiled because I thought about my late husband and my parents. I wish they could have been there. But more than anything, I wanted Daniel beside me. Before the event, he had promised he would come. He told me he would make time. Those words meant more than he probably realized. I arrived early and found my seat near the front. The chair beside me was reserved for him. I kept looking toward the entrance every few minutes, expecting to see him walk through the doors. The room slowly filled with people. Friends arrived. Volunteers greeted me. Everyone seemed excited. But the chair beside me stayed empty. As the ceremony began, I tried to focus on the kind words people shared. I smiled when they talked about my work. I thanked everyone who came. But deep inside, there was a quiet sadness I could not ignore. The person I wanted to see most was not there. I told myself there had to be a reason. Maybe something unexpected happened. Maybe he was delayed. Maybe he would arrive before it ended. A mother's heart always hopes a little longer. Then, just as I thought the day could not become more emotional, someone unexpected walked through the door. Someone I had not seen in years. Someone who remembered a promise I had completely forgotten. And in that moment, I had no idea that this person would change the way I understood family forever. After the ceremony ended, I stayed in my seat for a few extra moments, watching people gather around and congratulate one another. Everyone was smiling, sharing stories, and taking pictures. I smiled too because that was what I had always done. I had spent my entire life making sure other people felt comfortable, even when I was carrying my own disappointment. Quietly, many people came over to tell me how proud they were of my years of service. They thanked me for the work I had done in the community. Their words meant a great deal to me. But there was still one person I kept looking for. Daniel. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. I wanted to believe he was just running late. A mother's heart has a difficult time accepting that someone she loves might not show up when she needs them most. As I gathered my things, I noticed someone standing near the entrance. At first, I did not recognize him. Then he smiled, and I immediately knew who he was. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "I hope I am not too late." My heart stopped for a moment because I knew that voice. It was James Carter. I had not seen him in many years, but I remembered him clearly. James was the son of my closest friend, Rebecca, who passed away several years earlier. Rebecca and I had been friends for more than 30 years. We shared holidays, difficult seasons, and countless memories. When she became ill, I promised her that I would always look out for James if he ever needed someone. At the time, I never imagined that promise would mean so much years later. James was not a little boy anymore. He was a grown man with his own career and responsibilities. But when he walked toward me that day, I did not just see the successful adult he had become. I saw the young man who once needed encouragement during one of the hardest moments of his life. After Rebecca passed away, James struggled. He was trying to find his direction while learning how to live without his mother's guidance. I remembered sitting with him, listening to his worries, and reminding him that one difficult chapter did not define his entire life. I never thought those conversations would stay with him. I never thought he would remember. But standing there in that community center, I realized he had. "I heard about this day," James said, "and I knew I had to be here." I looked at him with surprise. "James, you did not have to come all this way." He smiled gently and replied, "Maybe I did not have to, but you were there for my family when we needed someone. I wanted you to know that someone was here for you too." Those words touched my heart in a way I cannot fully explain. Not because James was replacing anyone. He could never replace my son. But because, in a moment when I felt forgotten, someone remembered me. We sat together after most of the guests had left. James asked about my life, my memories with my husband, and how I was adjusting after so many changes. He did not rush the conversation. He listened. That simple act meant more than he probably realized. For years, I had been telling myself not to expect too much from people. I had learned to accept fewer calls, fewer visits, and fewer moments together. But James reminded me of something important. Being needed is not the same as being loved. True connection comes from people who choose to show up. When I returned home that evening, I looked at the empty chair that had been waiting for Daniel. It still hurt. I would not pretend it did not. A mother does not stop loving her child just because she feels disappointed. But for the first time that day, I also thought about the person who had walked through the door when I least expected it. James did not arrive because he was obligated to. He arrived because he cared. And that difference changed the way I looked at family. The days after the ceremony were filled with emotions I struggled to understand. I thought I would remember that day only because my son was not there. I thought the empty chair beside me would be the one thing I carried with me forever. But when I looked back, I realized something else had happened. Someone I never expected had reminded me that my life still mattered. James Carter had walked into that room not because he had to, but because he remembered. That simple act stayed with me. After I returned home, I found myself thinking about the years I spent believing that family was only defined by blood. I had always taught Daniel that family was the most important thing in the world. I believed that the love between a parent and child created a bond nothing could replace. And I still believe that. I loved my son. That would never change. But James made me understand that. Family could also be built through kindness, loyalty, and the choices people make when no one is forcing them to care. The next morning, James called to check on me. He asked if I had slept well and if I was feeling better after such an emotional day. It was such a small question, but I noticed something. He asked because he genuinely wanted to know the answer. He was not calling out of obligation. He was calling because my feelings mattered to him. During our conversation, James reminded me of something I had completely forgotten. Years earlier, when he was struggling after losing his mother, I had given him a small journal. I told him to write down his thoughts whenever life felt overwhelming. I had forgotten about that moment, but James had not. "I still have that journal," he told me. "You probably do not remember, but those words helped me during a difficult time." I sat quietly after hearing that. I had always thought the things I did for others were small. I never expected them to have a lasting impact. I was simply doing what I believed was right. But James showed me that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness become the memories people carry for years. That afternoon, I found an old photo album in my closet. As I turned through the pages, I saw pictures of Daniel when he was young. I saw birthdays, school events, family vacations, and moments I thought I would never forget. My heart felt heavy because those memories reminded me of how much I loved being a mother. They also reminded me how much I missed the closeness Daniel and I once shared. I did not want to replace my son with James. That was never the point. A mother's love does not disappear because someone disappoints her. But I had spent too many years pretending that being hurt did not affect me. I had convinced myself that needing attention or support made me weak. James helped me see that everyone deserves to feel valued, no matter their age. A few days later, James invited me to a community gathering. He said he wanted me to meet some of the people he worked with and share stories about my volunteer work. At first, I hesitated. I was not used to being the person others wanted to hear from. I spent most of my life helping behind the scenes, but I decided to go. That evening, I stood in a room full of people who listened to my memories of Laura, my experiences, and the lessons I had learned throughout my life. I realized something important. For so long, I had been waiting for one person to prove that I mattered. I had been waiting for Daniel to show up and remind me that I was important. But perhaps I had forgotten that my value existed long before anyone noticed it. When I came home that night, I received a message from Daniel. It was short. He said he was sorry he missed my event and hoped we could talk soon. I stared at those words for a long time. A part of me felt relieved. Another part of me wondered if he truly understood what his absence had meant. I did not know what would happen next between us. But for the first time in a long time, I was no longer waiting for someone else to decide my worth. I was beginning to understand that I was already valuable, whether people recognized it or not. After Daniel's message arrived, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table for a long time, holding my phone and thinking about all the years that had passed between us. His words were simple. He was sorry he missed my event. He wanted to talk. But emotions are rarely simple, especially when they come from someone you love deeply. Part of me wanted to call him immediately. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to believe that everything could go back to the way it was when he was younger and we were closer. But another part of me knew that something had changed. The empty chair at the ceremony was not just about one missed event. It represented years of small moments when I felt like I was slowly becoming less important in his life. I did not want to punish Daniel for that. I did not want anger to become the foundation of our relationship. But I also did not want to pretend that my feelings did not matter. For the first time in many years, I decided to be honest with myself. I could love my son and still admit that I had been hurt. Those two things could exist together. A few days later, Daniel came to visit. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, I felt a mix of emotions. I was happy to see him, but I was also nervous. We had avoided many conversations over the years. We had talked about work, weather, and everyday things, but we rarely talked about what was happening in our hearts. That afternoon, we sat in the living room where I had spent so many quiet evenings after losing my husband. Daniel looked around the room and noticed the photographs of our family. He picked up an old picture of himself as a child and smiled. "I remember this day," he said. I smiled too. I remember it very clearly. For a few moments, we were not a mother and son trying to fix a difficult relationship. We were simply two people remembering the love that had always existed between us. Then Daniel became quiet. He looked down and said, "Mom, I owe you an apology." I listened carefully. I thought because I was busy and taking care of my own life, everything would be fine, he continued. I never stopped to think about how it felt from your side. Those words were difficult to hear because they were true. I had spent years hoping he would notice without me having to say anything. But sometimes people do not understand what we are carrying until we are brave enough to share it. I told Daniel about the day of the ceremony. I told him that I did not need him to be perfect. I did not need him to solve every problem in my life. I only wanted to feel like I still had a place in his world. I did not need a big gesture, I said. I just needed you there. Daniel looked emotional. He told me he wished he could change that day. He said he had been so focused on his responsibilities that he forgot something important. "You spent my whole life showing up for me," he said. "I should have understood that showing up for you mattered too." Hearing those words brought tears to my eyes. Not because they erased the past, but because they showed that Daniel was finally beginning to understand. Later that week, I met with James again. I told him about my conversation with Daniel. James smiled and said he was happy for me. He never acted like he had replaced my son. He never wanted that role. He simply wanted me to know that I was not alone. That was something I admired about him. He had entered my life during a painful moment, but he never tried to take anyone's place. He simply offered kindness when I needed it most. As time passed, I started noticing small changes. Daniel called more often. He asked about my volunteer work. He wanted to hear stories about Laura. He started becoming part of my life again, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. I realized something important. Sometimes people do not understand the value of something until they almost lose the connection they once took for granted. But when they are willing to learn, listen, and change, healing is possible. The day Daniel finally understood me was not the day he apologized. It was the day he began showing up in ways that words alone could never replace. After my conversation with Daniel, I began to notice something I had not felt in a long time. I felt like I was no longer waiting for someone to choose me. For years, I had measured my happiness by the attention I received from my family. I thought if my son called more often, visited more frequently, or remembered important moments, then I would know I mattered. But through everything that happened, I learned a lesson that changed the way I looked at my own life. My value was never created by someone else's actions. It was always there. I just needed to remember it. As my relationship with Daniel slowly improved, my connection with James continued to grow as well. He became someone I could talk to about memories of Rebecca and the experiences that shaped our lives. We often laughed about small moments from years ago. He would tell me stories about his mother, and I would share stories about the woman she had been as my closest friend. Those conversations brought comfort because they reminded me that love does not disappear when someone is gone. It continues through the people who carry those memories forward. One afternoon, James asked me a question that surprised me. He asked if I had ever considered sharing more of my story with others. I laughed because I never saw myself as someone whose life was interesting enough to share. I told him I was just an ordinary woman who had lived an ordinary life. James shook his head and smiled. "That is exactly why people need to hear it," he said. "Most people are not looking for perfect stories. They want to hear about real people who faced difficult moments and kept going." His words stayed with me. I thought about all the years I spent believing that my biggest achievements were behind me. I thought about how many older people feel the same way. They spend decades caring for others, building families, and supporting the people around them. Then one day, they wonder if anyone still sees them. I realized that maybe my experience could help someone else feel less alone. Around that time, Daniel began making more of an effort to be involved in my life. He attended one of the community events I helped organize. Watching him walk through the doors brought back memories of the day he missed my ceremony. The difference was that this time, he chose to be there. He did not come because he felt pressured. He came because he wanted to share that moment with me. After the event, he looked around at the people I had helped and smiled. "Mom, I had no idea how much this meant to people," he said. I smiled and replied, "Neither did I, until I started paying attention." That evening, Daniel and I sat together and talked about things we had avoided for years. He asked about my dreams, my worries, and the things I wanted for the future. It was strange because those were simple questions, but they meant so much. I realized that for a long time, I had not needed grand gestures. I had only wanted someone to be curious about my life. Someone to ask how I was doing and truly listen to the answer. As months passed, the relationship between Daniel and James also changed. They met several times through the community work I was involved in. At first, I worried that there might be tension between them. I wondered if Daniel would feel uncomfortable knowing that James had been there during a time when he had not. But something unexpected happened. Instead of creating distance, James and Daniel found respect for each other. James never criticized Daniel. He understood that everyone has moments they wish they could handle differently. Daniel also understood that James had never tried to replace him. He had simply been a person who showed kindness when it was needed. Looking back, I realized that the hardest day of my life gave me a gift I never expected. It showed me the difference between people who are connected by family and people who choose to show up with love. It also reminded me that life can surprise us at any age. I thought I was losing something that day. I thought I was losing my place in my son's life. But instead, I discovered a deeper understanding of what family truly means. Sometimes, the people who arrive unexpectedly are the ones who help us see our own worth again. The months that followed brought changes I never expected. My life did not suddenly become perfect, and I still had moments when I missed the people and memories I had lost. But something inside me had changed. I was no longer looking at my life through the things that were missing. I was starting to appreciate the people who were present. For so many years, I believed that my greatest responsibility was making sure everyone else was okay. I was a wife, a mother, and a friend. I was the person people called when they needed advice, support, or encouragement. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that I also deserved those things. James reminded me of that without ever making me feel like I was weak. He did not come into my life to save me. He came into my life to remind me that I was still someone worth showing up for. One afternoon, James and I were organizing supplies for a community event when he brought up something from the past. He told me he had recently found an old letter his mother, Rebecca, had written about me. I was surprised because I never knew such a letter existed. James explained that his mother had always admired the way I cared about people. She believed I had a special ability to make others feel seen and valued. Hearing those words brought back so many memories. Rebecca and I had spent decades supporting each other through life's difficult moments. We celebrated birthdays together. We shared family stories. We stood beside each other during times when things felt uncertain. Losing her had left a space in my heart that I never expected anyone to understand. But through James, I felt connected to that friendship again. He carried pieces of Rebecca's kindness with him. He reminded me that the relationships we build throughout our lives can continue influencing us long after circumstances change. Around the same time, Daniel started opening up more about his own struggles. For years, I thought he was distant because he did not care. But as we talked more, I began to understand that he was also dealing with pressures I had never seen. He had spent so much time trying to build his career and manage his responsibilities that he stopped noticing the people who loved him quietly in the background. I did not excuse the moments when he hurt me, but I learned that understanding someone does not mean ignoring your own feelings. It means seeing the whole picture. One evening, Daniel asked me something that caught me off guard. He asked, "Mom, did you ever feel like I forgot about you?" I could have avoided the question. For years, I had avoided difficult conversations because I did not want to create conflict. But this time, I answered honestly. "Yes, Daniel. There were times when I felt forgotten." He looked down and nodded. "I am sorry," he said. "I thought because I loved you, you already knew. I did not realize that love also needs to be shown." Those words stayed with me. Love is not only something we feel inside. It is something we demonstrate through our actions. It is the phone call we make, the visit we schedule, the moment we choose to be present. Later that week, Daniel joined me and James at the community center. Seeing them together felt unusual at first. These two people represented very different parts of my life. One shared my history. The other had become part of my healing. But as I watched them talk and laugh together, I realized something beautiful. There was no competition between them. There did not need to be. Family was not a limited space where one person had to replace another. There was room for forgiveness. There was room for new memories. There was room for growth. That evening, I returned home and sat near the window where I often remembered Laura. I thought about how much had changed since the day of my ceremony. Back then, I believed an empty chair represented my place in the world. I thought it proved that I was forgotten. But I was wrong. That empty chair was not the end of my story. It was the moment that opened my eyes. It showed me that love can arrive in unexpected ways. It showed me that people can change. And most importantly, it showed me that my life still had many chapters left to write. As the seasons changed, I began to notice something different about my relationship with Daniel. It was not one single conversation that fixed everything. It was not one apology that erased years of distance. Instead, it was the small moments that slowly rebuilt the connection we once had. A phone call where he asked about my day. A visit where he stayed longer than expected. A simple question about a memory from my past. Those moments may have seemed ordinary to someone else, but to me, they were proof that people can find their way back to each other. For years, I had worried that the bond between Daniel and me had become something from the past. I thought the closeness we shared when he was young was gone forever. But I began to understand that relationships are not frozen in one moment. They change, they struggle, they grow, and sometimes they need two people willing to meet each other halfway. One afternoon, Daniel came over to help me organize some old boxes in the garage. As we looked through years of photographs and keepsakes, we found things we had both forgotten. There were pictures of family vacations, handwritten notes, and small memories from ordinary days that had become precious over time. Daniel held one picture for a long moment. It was a photo of him as a child sitting beside me in our backyard. He smiled and said, "I remember feeling like you were always there." I looked at him and replied, "I was." Then he became quiet. I do not know when I stopped noticing that. His honesty meant more to me than a perfect explanation ever could. I realized that sometimes people do not lose love. They simply become distracted by everything around them and forget to protect the relationships that matter most. That evening, Daniel stayed for dinner. It was something that used to happen often when he was younger, but over the years, those moments had become rare. We sat at the table and talked about simple things. We laughed about old stories. We remembered his father. We talked about Laura and the friendship she and I shared for so many years. It felt peaceful, not because everything from the past had disappeared, but because we were finally allowing ourselves to create something new. James continued to be part of my life as well. He often visited and helped with community projects. But what I appreciated most about him was his humility. He never reminded me that he had been there when Daniel was not. He never used that moment to make himself look better. He simply cared. That showed me the difference between someone who wants recognition and someone who truly wants to support another person. One day, I asked James why he had remembered my ceremony when so many others had forgotten. He smiled and said, "Because people remember how you make them feel. You made my mother feel loved. You made me feel like I mattered when I was struggling. I could never forget that." His answer stayed with me. I had spent years wondering whether my efforts had made a difference. I had wondered if the kindness I gave to others disappeared unnoticed. James reminded me that kindness does not always return immediately. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it comes from a place you never expected. But it leaves a mark. Looking back, I realized the day Daniel missed my ceremony was painful because I believed it was a reflection of my importance. I thought his absence meant I was no longer a priority. But I learned that another person's choices do not determine our worth. We can feel hurt without losing ourselves. We can forgive without forgetting. We can love people while still recognizing that we deserve to be valued. The biggest change in my life was not that Daniel came back. It was that I stopped waiting for someone else to prove that I mattered. I found confidence in my own story. I found joy in the relationships that surrounded me. And I found peace knowing that the love I had given throughout my life had never been wasted. It had simply traveled in ways I never expected. As time passed, I began to see my life differently. I no longer looked at the day of the ceremony as the moment when my heart was broken. Instead, I started to see it as the moment when I discovered something I had forgotten for many years. I discovered that being loved is not only about who shares your last name. It is also about who remembers you, who listens to you, and who chooses to stand beside you when it matters. My relationship with Daniel continued to grow in ways I never expected. We were not trying to recreate the past. We were building something new. I think that was the most important difference. For a long time, I wanted everything to return to the way it was when Daniel was a child. I wanted the days when he needed me for everything. But children grow into adults, and relationships must grow with them. I had to learn that being a mother did not mean holding on to the past. It meant accepting the person my son had become and allowing him the chance to become better. One Saturday morning, Daniel asked if I would join him for breakfast at a small cafe near his home. It was a place we had never visited together before. As we sat across from each other, I realized something simple but meaningful. We were creating a new memory, not one based on old expectations, but one based on who we were now. Daniel told me about his plans for the future. He asked about my community work and the projects I wanted to continue. He even asked if I would consider letting him help with some of the events I organized. That question meant more than he knew. It showed me that he was not just trying to apologize for the past. He was trying to become part of my present. Later that month, Daniel and James worked together on a community project. Watching them side by side brought a feeling I could not describe. Two people who had entered my life in completely different ways were now connected by respect and kindness. James never acted like he was competing with Daniel. Daniel never acted like James did not belong. They both understood something I had learned through my journey. Family is not a competition. There is no limit to how much love a person can give or receive. There is room for old bonds and new connections. There is room for forgiveness and gratitude. During one of our community events, I stood in front of a group of people and shared a few words about my experience. I talked about how every person reaches moments when they question whether they still matter. I talked about how easy it is to feel invisible as we get older. But I also shared something I had learned. A person's value does not disappear because someone fails to notice it. We continue to matter because of who we are, the kindness we share, and the lives we touch. After the event, several people came to speak with me. Some told me they had experienced similar feelings with their own families. Others shared stories about unexpected people who had shown them compassion when they needed it most. Listening to them reminded me that my story was not only mine. Many people carry silent feelings of disappointment and loneliness. Many people are waiting for someone to remind them that they are still important. That evening, I sat at home looking through old photographs again. I found a picture of Rebecca, James, Daniel, and me from years earlier at a neighborhood gathering. I smiled because I realized how connected our stories had always been. Rebecca had trusted me with her son. I had supported James during a difficult season. Daniel had found his way back to me after realizing what he almost lost. None of us knew how life would bring these moments together. But somehow, every experience had led me to a deeper understanding of love. I used to think the greatest gift was having everyone show up exactly when I expected them to. Now I understand something different. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from unexpected places. Sometimes the people who walk into our lives at the right moment help us see the strength we already had inside us. And sometimes, the hardest days become the beginning of the most meaningful chapters. When I look back at the day of the ceremony now, I no longer see an empty chair. I no longer see only the disappointment I felt when Daniel did not walk through those doors. Instead, I see the beginning of a journey that changed the way I understood love, family, and my own worth. At the time, I believed that moment would always represent the day I was forgotten. I thought it would remind me of the person who was missing. But life has a way of revealing that some moments are not endings. They are invitations to see something we could not see before. I spent many years believing that family was only defined by blood. I believed that being a mother meant always giving, always supporting, and always waiting. I never questioned whether I deserved the same care I gave to others. But after everything that happened, I learned that love is not supposed to be one-sided. A family is not built only by shared names or shared history. It is built by the people who choose to be present, who choose to listen, and who choose to care. Daniel and I continued to grow closer. Our relationship was not perfect, and I do not think any relationship truly is. We still had moments where we had to understand each other better. But the difference was that we were both trying. We were no longer avoiding difficult conversations. We were no longer pretending that everything was fine when something needed to be discussed. We were learning how to love each other as the people we had become, not only as the mother and son we had been. One afternoon, Daniel visited me and brought a small box filled with old memories. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes, and little reminders of the years we shared together. He told me he had been looking through his belongings and realized how many moments he had forgotten. Then he said something that touched my heart. "Mom, I do not want to spend the future wishing I had been more present in the past." Those words stayed with me because they showed me that Daniel was not just apologizing. He was changing. He understood. That love requires action. It requires effort. It requires showing people they matter while there is still time to create memories together. James remained an important part of my life as well. He continued helping with community projects and checking in on me. But the most meaningful thing about James was that he reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was not invisible. My kindness had mattered. The years I spent helping others had created connections I never expected. Sometimes we never know how deeply our actions affect another person. We may think a few words of encouragement or a small act of kindness will be forgotten. But those moments can stay with someone forever. On my 72nd birthday, something happened that I will always remember. Daniel and James both arrived at my home with a small celebration they had planned together. It was not a large event. There were no grand decorations or expensive gifts. It was simply a room filled with people who cared about me. As I looked around, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt completely surrounded by love. I thought about the woman I was on the day of the ceremony. I thought about how she sat there wondering if she still mattered. I wished I could go back and tell her what I know now. I would tell her that one painful moment does not define an entire life. I would tell her that people can surprise you. I would tell her that your value does not disappear when someone fails to recognize it. The greatest lesson I learned was not about who showed up and who did not. It was about understanding that love can take many forms. Sometimes it comes from the people we expect. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. But every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, and every genuine connection has meaning. My story did not change because someone finally noticed me. My story changed because I finally learned to see myself. I stopped measuring my worth by who was beside me and started appreciating the person I had always been. I was a mother. I was a friend. I was someone who had spent a lifetime giving love. And I finally understood that I deserved to receive it too.